Of Carbon Experts Live. My name is Abigail Mella. I lead Sustainability Comms here at One Click LCA, and I'm the host of today's episode. I'm very pleased to be joined by Panu Pasanen. He is the CEO and founder of One Click LCA, which is the world-leading software for LCA and EPDs across the construction value chain. Panu is an advocate for LCA, lifecycle costing, and green building systems. And he is the recent winner of the EY Tech Award in recognition of his significant contribution to decarbonizing the industry. Panu, if you might take a few moments to tell us who you are and what you're up to at One Click LCA.
Yeah, sure. So nice to meet you all. Panu Pasanen, CEO and founder at One Click LCA. I founded One Click LCA to help decarbonize the industry, and the software is, of course, the most scalable means we have to support that, but also to know whether the software has an impact. We've been following the progress of the industry, and we are sharing that in the form of the expert outlook and other data over the course of the year, which we also do, of course, periodically update. And in this session today, we'll be sharing key findings and also where it's changed materially from the last update of the update, which was in 2021. We'll be sharing what's the change in the outlook, and of course it may have gone different ways in different geographies. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great, Panu, thank you so much. If you can go ahead and cue the slides for the talk, April. April's our tech producer here in the background. Thanks, April. So in the episode today, we will examine data, as Panu mentioned, from the new 2024 Construction LCA and Embodied Carbon Outlook Report. The report is derived from One Click LCA's global survey of construction and manufacturing industry professionals. Let's start the show. Let's go to the next slide. So before we get started, I did want to give a quick nod to our production team, wonderful people in the background making this possible, including April on tech and Asha and Stephen, who are today's moderators. And they'll moderate today's live Q&A session at the end of the show. However, you can already start asking questions that they can begin reviewing and piping over to Panu. So don't be shy. If you are in Livestorm or in LinkedIn environment, just start dropping comments in the comment section and let us know what questions you would like Panu to address at the end of today's talk. Next slide. Great. So you might not know that our industry contributes up to 57% of global carbon emissions across the construction value chain. And with the world's building and infrastructure stock expected to double by the year 2060, we have to decarbonize now. Next slide. Thanks. And talking of decarbonization, this is why One Click LCA exists. We're here to address this challenge with you. So we have a global LCA software that empowers industry to decarbonize. And with it, you can comply with more than 80 national regulations, standards, certifications. You can also access the world's largest construction LCA dataset, including global, up-to-date, verified, supplier-specific, and generic LCA and EPD datasets. And finally, something that I especially think is quite cool is that we have more than 20 BIM and other integrations that support your existing workflow. And we exist to make construction sustainable. Next slide. Thank you. So I'll tell you a bit about the report at a very top level. So the 2024 Outlook report synthesizes a global survey's findings from hundreds of construction industry professionals. And it offers data-led insight on LCA or life cycle assessment practice and also embodied carbon challenges. And it's intended to support international regulators who are developing legislation, but also to help businesses, hit ESG commitments, decarbonize projects and products, and increase sector sustainability. Next slide. Thank you. So first up, Panu is going to look at who we examined and in the survey data that we collected. And this will provide some context and background information for you to better understand the report's findings. So I'll turn this section over to you, Panu.
Next, please.
Next.
Thanks, Abigail. It's an open survey, but open for professionals. So there's not an academic survey, no students, no research. As you can see here, the majority of the respondents are from various types of consulting services industry, so sustainability consulting in its various forms, reasonably, followed by design and engineering cumulatively, so engineering services, architecture and design services. Some of these arguably are multidisciplinary engineering companies, but everybody got to choose one, so this is the split. Construction management, we also got a fair share of respondents from there, but a bit less from product manufacturing and supply. This survey was also not particularly targeted for manufacturers. It was open to the broader industry, and due to the theme, undoubtedly, we had a lower share of representation from manufacturing. In terms of geography, survey was done only in English, so UK, North America had the most respondents, followed by Continental Europe and Northern Europe cumulatively, and then Asia, Middle East also had some respondents, but not equally many. So that's the split roughly, comparable distribution as we had in our earlier exercise. Next slide, please. And then what do they use LCA for? Reasonably, architect won't use it for the same purpose as a manufacturer. Same with construction management companies. So we provided 4 different options for respondents. So first being incorporating the services without charging separately. And this is the one of the more common choices in the construction management, architecture and engineering services. So quarter of all are looking at it from this point of view. So just providing the service as a value add to customers. Then internal use. Internal use is also a quarter for architecture, design and construction management, but much less so for consulting and engineering in the survey. And then majority of all responses in the service profession, so architecture, design, consulting and engineering, is to provide them for a fee. In construction management, a bit lower share, which is understandable. Building is a much more expensive asset than let's say, design project. And then if we look at the manufacturing sector, so manufacturers do not generate direct income from LCAs, very normal, but they definitely do use it to market and sell their own products, so which can be readily seen here in the responses for manufacturers. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Panu. So now that we've covered who we surveyed by profession and primary work function and geography, we're going to learn about what these industry professionals have to say about LCA compared to findings from our previous 2021 Outlook report. Panu, over to you.
Thanks. So start with the most important one. What is the carbon reduction potential from using LCA? For statistical simplicity, we have a standard question. How many of the respondents think that they can reduce carbon by at least 10% just from implementing LCA or embodied carbon study on the projects? And so we have 2 things happening here. In continental Europe, which was the most optimistic about the impact of LCA and embodied carbon assessments in the 21 survey, the optimism has waned. It can be a sampling error, maybe not. We'll see, we'll know a bit later. But in every other market, this is actually the expectation has increased. So people have higher expectations that use of LCA can help decarbonize a project by at least 10%. So of course, many of them believe that higher reductions can be achieved. The biggest jump is in North America, where of course the industry has also developed from a very low base. So there it's been from almost, let's say, 40% of respondents to roughly 60% of respondents believe that. So it's like basically 50% more people believe that LCA is impactful measure to adopt on a project. And UK, which arguably is a leader in LCA and embodied carbon, the share has continued to increase, which is of course encouraging. Rest of the world is a bit of a mixed bag, so there's different geographies, so we cannot tease out a logical conclusion from the that geography. Next slide, please.
Great. So we've looked at how industry professionals perceive embodied carbon reduction via LCA to have changed in just 2 years' time. And up next, we're going to look at their perceptions of how supply and demand factors impact carbon reduction emissions progress. Panu, over to you.
Thanks. So this is market-oriented or business, let's say, just so there has to be a buyer, there has to be a seller. And whoever is the buyer, we are just grouping them as demand-side factors here. The most limiting reason for lack of progress or limitation of progress on embodied carbon and LCA continue to be regulations and policies. So there's slight change here in the order of things, but the national regulations and policies is the most significant driver. In some countries we do have them, so obviously those countries wouldn't see that being a limiting factor. And then lack of municipal regulations and policies in the top four place. Then if we just look at the interest and awareness topics, so all of the top 5 positions in the demand side factors come from regulations, policies, interest, understanding, and awareness. So very similar, let's say, group of things. So lack of understanding from developers and investors / lack of interest, of course they can be conflated easily, and lack of awareness in market in general. These are limiting the progress. So what this means is that we actually need to educate people a lot. You guys who are tuned in, you need to explain it to everybody who you're working with. Well, we of course try to do our bit as well by educating people about the importance of LCA and embodied carbon, because as long as the understanding and interest are limiting factors, we haven't done our job, right? And it's very hard to scale the impact in the industry. Then if we go into the other factors, so lack of best practices, while it's not the most significant limiting factor, it has seen as somewhat limiting by a very significant share. So most actually of respondents of any. So what's the best way to go about it? Of course, those who work in the wood-based industry easily come to the conclusion that wood is the solution. But there's also other ways to go about it, including setting targets, including circularity, material efficiency, and whatnot. So that's probably quite important. What's quite encouraging, though, is that even though the limited business value of decarbonization is seen as a limiting factor, it's within the bottom of the pack. So the business value is there. It's not there for all, and it is still a limiting factor. So for our part, we are trying to help you make a business out of this. So and to make sure that you get the business value that you need to be able to scale this and deploy this across your entire activity. On the other hand, LCA is seen as recognized in certifications. Less than half of the respondents think it's a limiting factor, so which means, on the other hand, that majority think that it is not limiting. And the results are considered quite reliable, so still work to be done there, but they are considered only somewhat limiting factor. Availability and cost are limiting factor for half, but clearly the least important limiting factor on the demand side. So that would be the outlook. some directional changes from 21, but there's also different directions for different geographies. So no overall single conclusion in contrast to the 21 study. Next slide, please. Then if we go to the supply side, so if you are one of the parties who's providing embodied carbon and LCA studies to the marketplace, your customers, etc. So the factors are a bit different. And there we start with data problems. And we actually have here two kinds of data problems. We have quality problems and we have availability of data problems. And here we have lack of manufacturer EPDs, which is seen as a somewhat limiting or significantly limiting factor by almost 90% of respondents, which is one of the most important takeaways here, which obviously we try to scale that up to. But we also have the lack of national and generic data, which is seen as a limiting factor by 80% of respondents. So even though there's no ambiguity on which one is the more important, they are both seen as very significantly limiting factors. Then if we go into quality aspects, so quality of EPDs, that is also seen as a limiting factor by almost 90% of respondents. So if you contrast this with the responses on the LCA, the quality and reliability of LCA was not seen as significantly limiting factor by more than half, of the total respondents. So the quality perception is the opposite. EPDs are seen as highly variable quality, and this is very paradoxical if you consider that EPDs by definition are third-party verified. So go figure, but the brand of EPDs is significantly worse than that of LCAs, even in spite of them being third-party verified. There are many good reasons for this, like including the standards variability, but this is not intuitively explicable, let's say. Benchmarks are seen as a limiting factor. So what does good look like? Is 400 a good number? Is 500 a good number? Should it even be a number? Like, it can be very confusing to communicate a figure which you don't know what to compare against. Of course, most of the standards should be set at the national level because your building code may require different things based on your geography. And then we get to the quality standard for LCA and embodied carbon. So that is also seen as a limiting factor. And in terms of quality standards, they don't really exist. They only exist as part of LCA standards themselves. So there are no separate quality standards at all. And maybe it's not clear if there should be, like, the standards themselves should provide the quality levels for their implementation. And then if we go to the bottom of the pack, so problematic but not so, again, the cost is the least important. So one of the things we set out to do actually in 2011 was to reduce the cost of doing LCA by a factor of 10. So we have done that already. So it's not like all said and done, because still half of the market think it's a limiting factor, but at least it's just half and not all of the market, right? And BIM automation is of course one of the tools that can be used for that. And in spite 40% of the people don't consider it limiting, 60% do. So we still have great scope for improvement in terms of adopting it and making sure everybody's trained on it and that it actually works for the different contexts. Variable quality of BIM models, of course, is very directly connected to the lack of BIM automation. So if your BIM models are variable quality, much harder to automate. And the last call out goes to lack of qualified staff. So only 30% said it's not limiting. So in other words, 70% have some limitations on the qualified staff. And this is a topic that we'll explore a bit more later on. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Panu. So we've learned at a top level that lack of regulation and or lack of understanding from developers and investors are the top two demand-side hindrances to reducing embodied carbon progress. And on the supply side, we've seen that industry professionals see insufficient or highly variable product data as the top limiting factors in terms of embodied carbon progress. Next up, we're going to learn what these industry professionals have to say about the resources that are needed in order to reduce carbon in construction. Panu, over to you.
Thanks. So reducing time that you need to perform an LCA has two benefits. One, it reduces direct cost. Second, it makes your design iteration cycles faster because you get your design feedback just faster. And that means that you actually are able to do them more and thus get more value out of doing it. We grouped the respondents here by profession because the assumption is that they will do it differently and slightly for different purposes. And in the bottom of the charts, we have the share of respondents who need less than 20 hours, which is like a reasonable amount of time, let us say, for doing a complete LCA. I didn't say 20 hours, I said below 20 hours. So there's a difference in the various respondents' responses there. And we can see that most of the construction management companies are in this category and they need less than 20 hours to do the work. So for them, it's usually quite straightforward. It's doing as built or possibly as specified and as built. So just do 2 iterations. Whereas in the architecture and design services and consulting and engineering, only roughly a third are doing the work in that time, and most need a bit more. And very likely they will do more iterations, so they will vary to, let's say, schematic design, detailed design, construction drawings phases. Then if we look at the product manufacturing and supply, so actually surprisingly large share of product manufacturers were able to do that also in that time, possibly because we haven't grouped this into the level of complexity of products. So we have products of very different complexity from, let's say, elevator or, MEP systems to furniture, which are extremely simple in many ways. Yeah, I think that's kind of the main takeaway. And so that it varies by profession. And on the other hand, optimization is always much faster. So if you have a project and you've baselined it and you did maybe 1 or 2 alternatives on it, the optimization work is, as a main rule, always clearly faster. And you can see that most professions are able to do the optimization in less than 20 hours. Our reference case for this was a 5,000 square meter building with what's called here usual level of information available, which in Northern Europe, UK, and Western Europe means with building information model, and in some other geographies might mean not necessarily fully BIM based. So there's going to be variation by market as well. That would be it for the time spent on assessment. Next slide, please. So then we come back to the matching demand and resources. So is there enough people in the companies who provide LCAs to meet the demand? And as a main rule, the most common answer in all the regions is that the demand is higher than the resources, which is very encouraging, especially if you consider that some of the geographies which we surveyed are not in a great economic shape for construction industry, including Northern Europe and UK. So in every region, including the ones where sector in general has a poor demand situation, LCA and embodied carbon work has a high demand. Only rest of the world has a second most, only rest of the world and continental Europe have a significant share of responses where current resources suffice more than enough. So most of the time it's either parity or undersupply of resources to the demand of LCA work. Next slide, please. This is a bit more complicated chart, so I'm just going to ad-lib it in a bit simpler form. So the main finding is that everybody needs more people than they needed in 21. So there was already under resourcing in the companies versus the demand on the market, and this has changed to the direction where everybody needs more stuff now in all the regions. Materially, that's kind of the situation. So it's positive in terms of sustained demand in all geographies for LCA stuff. Yeah. Next slide, please.
So this is just a very quick reminder that we do have a live Q&A coming up at the end of this episode. And if you have any questions about construction LCA or embodied carbon, just drop these into Livestorm or LinkedIn, wherever you're dialing in from, and just leave these in the comment section. And Asha and Stephen, our moderation team, are gathering your feedback and questions to share with Panu for the live Q&A, which is coming up reasonably soon. Yeah, so stay tuned. Next slide. Thanks, April. So as a recap, we've looked at the industry's perspective on the resources that are needed to reduce carbon in construction. This includes time spent, market demand, human resources for LCA. And in the coming slides, we're going to explore what industry professionals believe can help with reducing time and reducing cost for LCA. Panu, I'll turn the stage over to you.
Thanks. So as a recap from previous, so we started with a target in 2011 to reduce the time spent on an LCA by a factor of 10. We've already been able to do that, but there's another 10-fold reduction to come. Like, will just take a couple of years to get there. Nobody on the main thinks that we will get another 10-fold reduction in the coming 3 years. But what's the good thing is that most of the respondents think that we will get between 15 and 30% reduction in the time required for LCA/LCA optimization in the next 3 years. And this is a mixed bag for every source, so technical, process and learning driven improvements. So if you are in a company which just doesn't know how to do it, obviously, your first driver is learning. If you're in a company which has implemented it to some extent, but doesn't have a software tool, maybe technology is the way, and then if you already have a software tool but not strong processes, then it's going to be process-driven gains. What's interesting also is that about a third in all think that there's going to be 30% or more in terms of gains, and actually the most advanced markets, which are continental Europe and UK, are the most punchy about the prospect of technology. So there we have, Northern Europe on top. So we have about 15% of all respondents in these markets think it's going to be more than 45% reduction in working time. So obviously, very feasible target, just not clear that every company is able to achieve such gains, because it also requires usually process improvements and similar things within customer organizations. But this is a very positive trend. All the same, it's clear that the human resources are going to be undersupplied in spite of the unit efficiency. Next slide, please. And then a couple of things. What are the companies actually doing to reduce the time and costs that they're spending on LCAs? So a couple of options here. Choosing different tools, hiring staff, increasing training, and increasing awareness and other. And in here, what we can say is that training is actually quite significant driver in most geographies. Tools, everybody seems to use some tools, except in the rest of the world. Continental Europe also looking to switch tools. Tool change is not seen as a significant driver in most geographies. Luckily, Northern Europe being our home, nobody wants to switch away from One Click LCA, at least among this survey respondents. And then, of course, there's an increasing awareness and also just plain resourcing so that you can dedicate people to do it as opposed to just getting it done as a side job, which are seen as potential drivers. Next slide, please. And these are then the main underlying factors which enable you to save time. So in here we have a big distribution, but in the main, the biggest driver is automation of LCA with other software tools. Maybe Revit, maybe Grasshopper, maybe Rhino, maybe your PLM software, maybe your cost management software, whatever software that is. That's the biggest trend across every geography. Second biggest driver is data availability and accessibility. So how quickly and easily can you access the data and how well you can use it. Then we have the same topic about the increased knowledge and development of easy to use tools, which are also seen as ways to reduce time of LCA and LCA optimization in the future. Next slide.
Great. Panu was just talking about training and learning as an important aspect of conducting LCA with reduced time and cost. And I did want to let you know about One Click LCA's Academy. Our Academy has a goal to actually train 1 million professionals by the year 2030 by providing free training and courses in low carbon and sustainability best practice across the construction value chain. And with the Academy, you can earn a globally recognized certification, which can support career growth or moving up the career ladder, and also just enabling you to reduce carbon in construction in your day-to-day work, which is very empowering. So if you've got a mobile phone, you can just hold that up and literally scan this QR code that you see on screen now, and this will direct you to the Academy. Or our moderators will also drop the link to the Academy in the comments in Livestorm and LinkedIn. So you can find the link to Academy there as well. Next slide. Great. So going back to recap what Panu was just discussing, he explored the market's take on reducing time and cost for LCA, and this includes improvements in tech, in process, and learning, and also exploring how companies and firms can best execute this. So we've now gotten to actually the final section of this talk, and we're going to analyze data regarding what industry professionals have to say about EPDs, or environmental product declarations. And I'll turn this final set of data analysis over to you, Panu. Thanks.
Excellent. So environmental product declaration is a third-party verified lifecycle assessment, which is made public by an EPD program operator. And it can be, well, it's almost always, not always, but almost always manufacturer specific. And it can be product specific or product average and that kind of thing. And the limiting factors on the demand side for creating EPDs are completely different from the building LCA ones. The common thing, though, is that the lack of regulations and policies limits it the most. So the national regulations requiring EPDs in the strictest sense, they only exist in France, really, Netherlands, and then in weaker form in some other countries. So that's a different thing. And but here, the cost of EPDs is the second most important factor. So it's the totally opposite ranking, if you think, in terms of the building LCA. The cost is seen as the least important limiting factor. Here is the second most. And by the way, obviously, we have geared much of our work to make sure EPDs are affordable. Lack of awareness, common. Lack of interest, common. So awareness and interest are important demand side factors. And here, 75% of respondents thinks that there's some limitation from lack of awareness and lack of interest. So it's pretty substantial chunk of industry. So if you just look at the distribution of the limiting factors here, you can say EPDs lag maybe 4.5 years behind building LCA in terms of maturity, depending on the market, of course. And then again, coming to interest, understanding, and whatnot. So there's the lack of understanding of EPD as a factor. Fragmentation of EPD data. So in case it's not obvious, so EPDs are not found in any one place, well, except One Click LCA, but they are published by different EPD program operators. So EPDs are all over the place, and some of them are only in non-numerical format, so they can be in PDFs but not captured into machine-readable format at all. So the data is scattered, and that's seen as quite significant limitation. And lastly, lack of confidence in the quality of EPDs, so which we already discussed. So EPDs, in spite of being third-party verified, are less trusted than building LCAs. Undoubtedly, it's also connected with the limited awareness and understanding of EPDs still to date. But that's the short version of limiting factors for EPDs. Next slide, please. Then in terms of use of EPDs, everybody who is in the design industry, or everybody bar 5% give or take, is using EPDs to choose products and assess buildings. Construction management, of course, does the same. Couple of the contractors who also make some of their materials like asphalts or concretes and whatnot, they may buy EPDs for their plants. Then in the consulting services, we have two sides of business. So we have the side which does building level work, who use EPDs in their projects, but many of the consultancies also provide EPDs as a service, which is of course quite potentially, let's say, financially attractive because it's seen as expensive by the buyers on the demand side. So must be good money in there for consultants. On the other hand, product manufacturers do use EPDs for their own products. Very logical, confirmed by the study. Yeah, I think that's kind of the main findings of the use of EPDs by profession. On to the next. So what are the product categories that require EPDs the most? A simple answer, all of them, most favored, but interestingly enough, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing product category is the single most sought after category. It's also one of our priorities. So we just launched a Luminaire EPD generator tool recently and continue to work on a number of MEP category products. But the main construction materials, concrete, also wood, come to the top. Steel is not seen as very limiting factor. Of course, steel is in much more sense tradable commodity than concrete or wood, where you usually know where it's coming from. And in other product categories, only doors and windows really stand out. Everything else is kind of occasionally cited, but not thought of as the biggest blocker for doing the work you need to decarbonize your buildings. So MEP tops the charts, let's say, as a single material category. Next slide, please. Here we have a couple of interesting findings. So most important is this. In manufacturing, almost half of the companies feel they need EPDs to stay on the market with competition. So they feel really strongly about that. Across the design and construction disciplines, the share is like varying between 14 and 22%. So it's not as big driver in that sense. Every profession feels it's impactful for their internal sustainability goals, and quite a good chunk of the businesses think it's a way to increase demand and generate revenue. And surprisingly, I would say engineering service companies have the highest expectations on that. You could have expected maybe product manufacturers to belly for expansion opportunities as well, considering they see it being as strong a demand factor in terms of staying on the market. Yeah, those would be the main findings, but what's important here is that it's really seen as impactful on the business. How you leverage it, of course, then varies by your profession. Next.
Thank you so much, Panu. So our live Q&A session is going to begin shortly. If you have any outstanding or burning questions, drop those in the comments. But before we turn to the live Q&A, I would like to give you the chance to learn a bit more about our online resources and digital tools for design, construction, and manufacturing. So you'll see here on screen the opportunity to scan a QR code to access your own copy of the Carbon Experts Outlook report. After Panu has offered a deep dive into this data, you too can just access this readily. So scan the QR code to get it, or our moderators will drop the link to the report in the comments section here. Next slide. Thank you. I will take a moment to tell you about our design and construction software. You can use it to create low carbon structures by comparing design options and also specifying materials. With our software, you can achieve green building certifications, you can comply with regulations, and also optimize for circularity, as well as reviewing other environmental impact factors early on. And you know the drill by now, just scan the QR code, or our moderation team will shortly drop that link in the comments so you can learn more about design and construction software. Next slide. Thank you, April. And finally, I'll tell you a bit about our manufacturing software, which is very cool. It lets you create, verify, and publish EPDs and also carbon footprints, so you can comply with standards and national requirements. And this lets you differentiate your business or firm with sustainable products for buildings and infrastructure. So go ahead, use your mobile, scan that QR code now, and our team will also drop the link to learn more about our manufacturing software in the comments section here for all of you. And before we get started with the live Q&A, we'll have one more slide. April? Thank you. So if One Click LCA sounds like a good solution for your needs, our business development team, comprised of global carbon experts from the industry, would love to provide a tailored demo to show you how our software might work in action for you. So Asha and Stephen, if you would now please trigger the live poll function in Livestorm. So if you're dialing in from Livestorm, you'll see a poll which asks if you would like to see a custom demo to learn how our software works in action. So if you would like to book that demo with our Carbon Expert team, just click yes in the poll that you can see in the Livestorm environment. And something very cool is that you're going to get onto a call with, an MEP engineer or, an architect. There are very expert people who know everything about sustainability across the value chain. So you can have a very productive conversation with one of our carbon experts. We have a team of 180 international carbon experts, and they can help you understand more about construction LCA, embodied carbon, other sustainability factors in the industry that impact you and impact your work. So if you would like our business development team to directly contact you to book a free demo to show you how our design and construction software or our manufacturing software works, just click yes in the poll and we'll be in touch with you shortly, and we really look forward to hearing from you. Next slide, thank you. Okay. Finally, this is the moment you've been waiting for. We're going to begin our live Q&A with Panu. If you have any last-minute questions, don't be shy. Drop them in the comments. And Asha and Stephen will pipe these over to Panu for the final section of the show. So let's toggle the slides away now, and we can go ahead and start reviewing some of those incoming questions. Let's see. All right. So the first question, as a construction management student, could you advise on steering my career towards decarbonization?
Well, I mean, first you need to know what you want to do, right? So if you're interested in working in sustainability, there's a lot of work in it. We have seen the trend since about 2013. I think we have seen constant increase in the demand for sustainability. Can vary a bit by region, can vary a bit by economic cycle, but the trend is clear. Like construction volumes are not growing in the most of the world. I mean, extremely rare places where they grow. Demand for sustainable construction, on the other hand, definitely grows. So from that point of view, very useful choice. Also, if you feel this is meaningful work, probably may warm your heart a bit also after a hard day at the office. So that's my advice for what it's worth.
All right, next question. Fragmentation is seen as a drawback for EPDs, despite eco-platform's efforts to address this, with most key program operators being members. Could you explain further why fragmentation is still viewed as a limiting factor?
Yeah, a very good question. So what's interesting, if you are a program operator, which is eco-platform member, it doesn't mean that all your data goes to the eco portal. So eco portal is where they have the digital data, and that's in a good nick, that's comparable and all that, but it's just a couple of thousand data sets really. And there's a massive amount of EPDs which are published and which are only available as non-digitized PDF documents. And guess what? Nobody makes them machine readable, well, except us. Right, so they're not going to be available there. So they are eco-platform members, but they are not going to go into the same data pool. So you actually cannot find them there. And in some cases, some EPD programs, they are completely digital, so they publish all their EPDs going forward in a digital format. But others publish like less than 20% of their data in a digital format. So it's very, very varied. And of course, if you have complete coverage or not, it's a huge difference. Like here we have not even started addressing the problem of fragmentation as a whole industry. I mean, for us, we don't consider it a problem, but like from an industry point of view.
Okay, this is from Philippe. Has One Click LCA had success in influencing regulators in any region to push for LCA as a baseline requirement in the building industry? And if so, how?
Well, obviously, yeah, a little bit. We are a Finnish company, so we have oversized influence in Finland, and we've been working on since 2013 actually with our government here to progress these to pilot programs, to put it into the government programs and legislative programs and everything. Doing roadmaps in between and whatever goes into the legislative process. So it's a long haul job. UK, we have surely influenced it. Most of our influence has been indirect, so a lot of publishing, a lot of support for everybody who works on the topic. And to smaller extent, we have also been able to contribute on specific things in Nordics and a little bit in other regions in Europe and Singapore, incidentally as well.
Okay, Nazish, how should stored biogenic carbon and bio-based materials be accounted for to emphasize their advantages? Is there a chance for dynamic LCAs to be integrated soon?
How should stored biogenic carbon be accounted for is a values choice, because the physical facts are obvious, like it's carbon, it is stored, and it's released when the material is incinerated. Like the physics are absolutely clear. So then this question of accounting is an accounting principle, and that's a fundamental values choice. And we are software developer. We implement standards. We try to not to have a view on how things should be done, because for good reasons or other reasons, your accounting principles in your location may vary. And it's not like easily avoidable. If you work in the UK, you will have to work using RIG standards because everybody uses RIGs. You cannot just make up your own, calculation methods. And France does something completely different. So how should be accounted for is some different question. But if you then want my personal opinion on it, it should be counted according to the physics laws. So if you burn it, it's released. End of story. Yeah.
Okay, next up. So the construction products regulations requirements for PCF data and EPDs from 2030 may boost demand for LCAs and EPDs. Will this address regulatory gaps impeding EPD development, or is more legislative reform needed? And this is a second question from Tom. Thank you for the many questions today.
So construction product regulation will address almost everything for what's strictly under construction product regulation. But construction product regulation doesn't cover MEP. It doesn't cover many other products which are used in buildings. So I don't think it's like solving everything, but it's very substantial overhaul. The implementation time, of course, is quite long. So I would say, yes, we need other interim regulations and actions because the whole cycle takes tediously long. But ultimately, it's the right kind of reform because it's horizontal of the whole industry and addresses really good chunk of the industry's product categories. And of course, for countries which are not in EU, EEA, then they need to do whatever they need to do.
Nice. Okay, we have a question from Jerome. So as a product manufacturer, what legislation do you see coming in different markets, especially North America? And do you think there is a timeline for EPDs being mandatory for all products? Really interesting question.
Well, if we just look at North America, the typical way to look at it is buy clean regulation, and buy clean regulation is usually attached to money flows. So if you have any governmental money going into work, so state money, federal government money or something, you can attach requirements to it. And those are typically buy clean type of regulations. And buy clean regulations are very often product category specific, so they are specifying the requirements for product types. Today, it's mostly the commodities, so steel, concrete, cement, glass, that kind of thing. Useful, but super narrow. Like these are, of course, big mass materials. These are thermally manufactured materials, so they have high carbon footprints, but it doesn't cover a big chunk of the industry. So much of the industry is still based on voluntary and non-regulatory drivers and commercial advantage that you can get out of it. And as far as the entire North American market is concerned, well, I mean, political uncertainty obviously is not like insignificant, like pretty hard to say. But I don't see a time when EPDs would be mandatory for all products in North American market. It could be so at state level effectively sometimes, but that also requires quite a long political process.
All right, a question from Dan. Could EU's mandate of digital product passports or product passport portals incorporating EPD metrics boost verifiable bottom-up LCA adoption? And will UK follow EU's lead?
I understand verifiable bottom-up LCA adoption means here that LCAs would be made with digital EPDs from European Declaration of Performance, which incorporate EPD data. So these will definitely accelerate all kinds of LCA, whether it's done in the way you described or any other way. So this is unavoidable. It's a very significant regulatory move. Whether UK will follow EU's lead, I think just from a cost point of view, it would be very complex for UK not to try to adopt it, because otherwise all the products which are traded across the channel would be having to comply with two different sets of regulations. So having some kind of regulatory compatibility would seem to be the only common sense thing to do. Of course, when products are too expensive to trade in terms of logistic costs, then it doesn't too much matter. Like concrete, nobody brings ready-mix concrete from the UK to France or Ireland, but other product categories definitely can be impacted. So it's quite reasonable to expect UK to align to some extent.
All right, let's see, this is our last question of the episode. So from Nihal, can the case studies on the website be considered to extract benchmarks of CO2 per square meter or used as best practices? If not, then where can we find carbon benchmarks for buildings? Very nice.
So we actually have these Carbon Heroes benchmarks as part of One Click LCA software. So inside the software, whenever you create a project and you choose a country and project type, it shows you where you are on A to G scale. If you're familiar with the energy performance classification system, it's the same system, right? So we apply that as part of the One Click LCA, and it's also available, if I remember correctly, in our free version of the software, which is called One Click LCA Planetary. So you should be able to use that like also there. If not, then also at least in the trial version of the commercial One Click LCA. Those are global benchmarks, so they are available for every region, every building type, but then there's many other benchmarks which are published by national organizations like LETI for London and UK, and CLF for North America and whatnot. So local benchmarks exist for a number of locations too.
All right, thank you so much, Panu. And before we conclude today's show, I'm very excited to briefly announce our next live stream event with Panu, what you need to know about changes to the EU's product EPD regulations. In this episode, we're very excited to be joined by the Eco Platform Managing Director, Christian Donat, and he'll be joining Panu for a survey of the latest changes to the EU's product EPD regulations. So the conversation will tackle things like construction product regulation, energy performance of buildings directive, declaration of performance, EU taxonomy, a lot of other regulations, and investigate very specifically how these can be tackled by you in practice. So the event takes place on Thursday, February 22nd, just about 1 month from now. And you can already register by clicking the link that Asha and Stephen drop in the comments section. We really look forward to seeing you then. Christian is a quite fascinating individual, and I think this is going to be a very exciting conversation. We'll go to the next slide to conclude the show. Just as a note, we're always happy to hear from you. You can contact us anytime. Just go to www.oneclicklca.com. And if you want to learn more about our construction software or manufacturing software, you can write us directly at sales@oneclicklca.com. We have a team of 180 international carbon experts with whom you can have highly productive conversations to learn how our software can help you drive down carbon emissions or embodied carbon in your projects and also products. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.